what Pharmac does and doesn't pay for is always hitting the headlines.
Pharmac and Health New Zealand want to extend the vaccination powers of pharmacists, but GPs are concerned.
Pharmac has confirmed in a media release that free flu vaccines for these groups would no longer be funded.
An Auckland man is getting treatment for an aggressive bone marrow cancer in Germany after local treatment options were unavailable or rejected by Pharmac.
Pharmac is seeking bids from suppliers of continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps in the hopes of offering them free of charge next
Associate
year.
Professor and neonatal paediatrician from Auckland University is describing Pharmac's decision not to fund an RSV preventative drug as disappointing.
But when I set out to quiz the drug buying agency on its funding policies, I didn't expect to have the tables turned on me.
Thinking about the number of prescriptions written in the last financial year, which was the medicine that was prescribed the most frequently?
Ooh. I was going to go paracetamol or like ibuprofen.
Oh my God, you're so good. That is so good.
Kia ora, I'm Davina Zimmer, and today on The Detail, we take a look inside the $1.5 billion organisation that's behind the country's supply of not just painkillers, but all publicly funded medication. It's an area where if you're not on that list, the anguish is real, where patients are both dealing with their health battles and coming under financial strain.
It's $8,865 every 3 weeks, whereas it's funded in the UK and Australia. So why are Wahinis in New Zealand dying? Why are our whānau not actually able to access these drugs?
What I've experienced in the last year since I've had cancer is that a lot of people have been reaching out to me and saying, you know, I'm going through the same journey that you are.
If there's a drug available, surely we must, fund it and keep our people alive. I mean, we have that right.
Pharmac, prolong our lives!
Fund Pharmac, prolong our lives!
I think it's a very difficult role that Pharmac plays, and when there are delays, when people are experiencing for themselves or for their family loss, pain, that's really hard, and it's difficult not to just to look at Pharmac and say, give me my medicine.
That's Dr. David Hughes, Chief Medical Officer and Director of Advice and Assessment at Pharmac. His job is to oversee all the advice that Pharmac receives when it's deciding on whether or not to give a funding application the green light.
So look, despite many recent changes in the health system in New Zealand, Pharmac's statutory objective has been in place since 1993, and that is, if I can read it, to secure for eligible people in need of pharmaceuticals the best health outcomes that are reasonably achievable from pharmaceutical treatment and from within the amount of funding provided.
It was the time where the health reforms were going to a more privatised model. That national government in those early years was going down that track. They wanted to bring in an agency that could have some leverage over the drug companies and force down the prices of medicines, and they set up Pharmac.
We are tasked with securing the best health outcomes. As you may know, there's been a lot of recent discussion about whether Pharmac should take a broader view of non-health impacts, but currently we are tasked in our objective to focus on health outcomes.
One of the things that people are calling for is a review of Pharmac because it hasn't ever been properly, fully reviewed, and it'd be hard to think of other agencies that have gone quarter of a century without a very good look into how they operate.
Those calls for a review were answered, and it was done 2 years ago, and it was scathing.
The days of the independent Republic of Pharmac are over. That's what the Health Minister Andrew Little said today in response to an independent review of the drug funding agency. Review panel chair Sue Chetwin said it highlighted deficiencies in the decision-making process and the quality of the decisions. These resulted in inequitable outcomes for Māori, Pasifika and disabled people.
And I think the second important point is that Pharmac is not only the decision maker, it is also the holder of a capped budget for the funding of pharmaceuticals. That budget is set every year.
Today, I'm announcing the government has prioritised additional investment in Pharmac's combined pharmaceutical budget. That budget purchases our medicines, vaccines, medical devices and other treatments. We're putting an extra $160 million into Pharmac over 4 years so that New Zealanders can continue to get the medicines they need despite global pressure on supply chains.
We are funded from Vote Health, but we are separate now from the funding of hospitals and primary care. But we are given an amount of money. It's called the combined pharmaceutical budget. And that money has to buy all the pharmaceuticals that we fund for community and hospital medicines.
So what does it look like in other countries that probably would be comparable to New Zealand?
Yes, so in the UK, they do a similar job to us in terms of getting advice and assessment on pharmaceuticals, but they have a threshold. So they say if a medicine provides a better value for money than a certain threshold, then they have a binding agreement with the rest of the NHS, the National Health Service in England and Wales. That means that the National Health Service has to fund those treatments. So although NICE makes the decision, it hands over that funding essentially to another agency to manage.
Right. And having something like that format would not be realistic in New Zealand?
I think it has been considered before. There are many pros and cons about the different models. It would certainly be a matter for the minister rather than Pharmac to think through those things.
So what is the criteria for companies, specialists and ordinary people who want to apply for medical funding?
For many years, Pharmac would only accept applications for funding of medicines that had already received MedSafe approval. So that means the medicines that were registered for use in New Zealand. In more recent times, we've accepted applications where the medicine is in the process of registration with MedSafe. This is what we've called kind of our parallel assessment process.
Quick note, if a treatment doesn't have MedSafe approval, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not safe or still in trial phase. In fact, David says most medication Pharmac gets applications for are in the very end of their product development.
So that parallel assessment process has been in place for cancer treatments for some time. And we've expanded that very recently to become essentially the default for all our applications. When we get the application, will still depend on the supplier, but it would allow them, once they have made their application for approval through the MedSafe process, also apply to us for funding. For medicines for rare disorders, we go even a step further than that, and we do not require those suppliers to have even signed up for the MedSafe process, because we understand that there are quite a few barriers to that for rare disorders.
Take me through that process now. So someone applies to have a medication funded by Pharmac.
Yep.
What happens then?
Yeah, look, the journey to Pharmac funding starts with an application, usually from a pharmaceutical company, but may also come from a clinician or a member of the public. Now, once again, we are quite unusual to accept consumer or public applications. And as well, unlike similar agencies overseas, we don't charge an application fee. We currently get around 75, sometimes a little higher, applications per year. And the journey to funding has many stages, some of which may be repeated as we get new advice or information is obtained. All of the process has clinical advice and critical appraisal of evidence at its core. Our main advice comes from the Pharmacology and Therapeutics Advisory Committee, which we call for short PTAC, and it's an expert committee of clinical practitioners. Now, they consider the clinical evidence around the funding proposals and take into account Pharmac's factors for consideration before making recommendations. Now, PTAC interacts with 21 specialty advisory committees that provide specialised advice on clinical areas as diverse as cancer, mental health, dermatology. And we have over 140 health professionals that provide us with this expert clinical advice, not only in committees, but between committee meetings to answer specific follow-up questions and provide general advice about the health sector.
As well as seeking expert medical advice, Pharmac also gets the consumer perspective.
The Consumer Advisory Committee has been in place, I think, since 1993 when we set up. And certainly we use that committee extensively to test out ideas and to get their advice on all things consumer-focused in Pharmac. But this was taking that a step further and having on each advisory committee to have a consumer member who would bring to that committee a focus on health need, the suitability of treatments, and a stronger focus on unmet health need in situations where that was where there were a disparity of health needs.
A mental health consumer advisor, for example, could let the experts know where the problems are developing or are hidden or concentrated, as they're involved on the ground and connected with that specific community. Pharmac evaluates each application through its Factors for Consideration framework. This has 4 parts: need, health benefits, cost and savings, and suitability. Each factor is analysed through 3 different lenses: the individual, their whānau and community, and wider society, which includes the health system.
For example, the existing treatment is an IV infusion, an intravenous infusion. Somebody would have to go into hospital or a day unit to get that infusion. And the new treatment that's under consideration does the same job, but in a tablet that can be taken at home. When we look at the difference, we will take into account, in terms of our prioritizations, the costs or the reduced costs of the health system, the reduced time and impact on family and caregivers and the individual. We still need to obviously balance our budget. That's very much in our goal. We need to get the best health outcomes that are reasonably achievable from a therapeutic treatment from within the funding provided. So although we take into account the costs that may be reduced in the system, we still have to, at the end of the day, have enough money in our budget to pay for the medicine.
So funding a medication isn't quite as easy as seeing a good one and signing a cheque. Treatments are expensive. To put that into perspective, currently 80% of Pharmac's funding costs go towards medication for 10% of the population. And a capped budget means that if the limit's been reached, Pharmac can't fund anything else, even if it wanted to. It's not an easy decision. How do you place a dollar figure on a person's life?
How we look at it is we look at the health benefit that a person would get from that treatment compared to the existing treatment, and then compare the costs of the new treatment to standard of care, which is, for people who there is no active treatment, is what we call best supportive care. But still the parameters apply.
How does equity come into the application consideration in the process?
So we've recently released our equity policy, and certainly it's a very strong focus for us as we consider our priorities under PIORA. From my perspective, from the advice and assessment perspective, we are looking to get as much information from pharmaceuticals companies about the impact on those communities who have poor health outcomes. So we're changing the information requirements that we have to get from suppliers first up. We're also routinely asking our committees, our external clinical advisors, for the evidence of the impact of the application under consideration for patients and communities, again, who have the highest need. We're also internally looking to develop a measure that will help us to consistently identify, again, the impact of treatments for those with the highest needs and the poorest outcomes, so that we can more consistently take that impact into account in our prioritization work.
When the budget runs out, applications are placed on Pharmac's options for investment list.
These are the medicines that we would like to fund if we had headroom in our budget. And we rank the applications in order so that indeed the highest on that list tends to be the first cab off the rank when we get either a negotiation that will save us some money, or when, such as in the wonderful case of Budget 2022, when we got a $191 million uplift over 2 years, and we were able to fund 20 new medicines and broaden access to a further 22 medicines.
Included in those 22 treatments were 2 for spinal muscular atrophy and 1 for cystic fibrosis, Trikafta, which has been billed as a life-changing miracle drug. It's a medicine that Newshub's Paddy Gower highlighted.
Pharmac called today and said that they'll be funding Trikafta.
What? Huh?
I said, Pharmac called me today and said that they're funding Trikafta
For like everybody?
for everybody aged over 6.
When? Like, when?
From April the 1st next year. It's going to be announced shortly.
Oh my God. I don't know what to say. This is... I can't swear. My heart's going so fast.
Usually, Pharmac looks at the health gains of a new treatment and compares it to what's already available. It also looks at the cost of a new treatment versus the cost of the old treatment. These two comparisons determine where a medication ranks on the options for investment list. Trikafta was an example of how an extremely high unmet health need can raise a medication's priority in the ranking, even if it comes at a greater dollar cost. Another example was COVID.
The approach to COVID funding was obviously unprecedented, and we worked quickly as we could to identify treatments that would significantly reduce inpatient admissions during a period of the pandemic that there were serious concerns about the ability of the hospital system to survive. And so we acted quickly to fund a broadened access to the influenza vaccine and to a treatment called palivizumab, which is a treatment for RSV, a preventive treatment for RSV. But in both of those cases, it was flagged early at the time of funding that this would be a time-limited funding. During the period of time that they've been funded, we have undertaken a formal assessment process, and we've identified, in the absence of a pandemic, what the benefits and costs to the system are for both of those treatments. And they are sitting in relation to other investments that we want to make. And the investments that we are higher on the list than those two are, investments that provide either a better health gain or have a combination of a better health gain and a lower cost.
Okay. Is there a time limit on the assessment process?
Look, we're really focusing on getting our assessment process as efficient as possible. In the last 5 years, it's come down to about 20 months. I think that's still far too long. We're very keen to get it down to about 12 months from receipt of the application to ranking as an average.
12 months seems like a long time. Why does it take 12 months to just decide whether, like, what ranking this medication should even get?
Yeah, so we've been playing catch up for probably about 10 years, really. There was a huge wave of applications that we got back in 2011, and we've essentially tried to pick the applications that we see as having the most to gain from. But that has meant that there are a number of applications that are quite old. So, yeah, we have a certain amount of staff to work on a certain number of applications, and the process is highly detailed, highly technical, involves clinical appraisal, committee meetings, health economic assessment, cost utility. It's quite a detailed work, and we're a small organisation.
A small organisation, how many people are actively working on funding applications?
Actively working on funding. I couldn't give you that number off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Based on an Official Information Act request released 2 years ago, Pharmac had just over 150 full-time employees.
So we have a small number of internal clinical advisors who support the work of the 21 committees. We've got a small group of coordinators. Our assessment team has both the people who write the papers and record the committee meetings and turn those into recommendations, and then the health economists who do the modelling for the costs and the health gains.
And so ultimately, is it like a D-Day situation where it's like, right, today's the day we make the decision on whether this medication gets funded or whether it goes onto the options for investment list?
Kind of. I mean, so we have a quarterly prioritisation meeting, and, we get together as an organisation and we have a multi-criteria decision-making conference. Yeah, it's very engaging. It's hard brain work. We question, we sometimes argue, we discuss, debate, and make some decisions. as I said, as we are considering how we can do things more efficiently, not everything has to come to that meeting because, there are other ways to manage that, those applications. But yes, still the quarterly prioritization meeting is quite a big thing for the organisation, absolutely.
And how much can Pharmac say regarding their decision on whether or not to fund a certain medication or treatment?
Well, look, so it is usually driven by commercial sensitivity. Obviously, we don't release where a medicine is ranked within the options for investment list. If you're a supplier and that you knew that you were number one on our list, you might not be particularly interested in negotiating a better deal. There's a commercial tension. Obviously, we want to buy more treatments for more people. So vigorously negotiating on behalf of the New Zealand public is a part of our job. Any advantage that we can get in that negotiation is good. I say online, if people are interested in an application, then they can see the journey of the application to this point and what stages might be left in that application. Obviously, getting a sense of where in that journey an application is gives a sense of a time frame, but that will be a very rough time frame.
For friends and whānau whose loved one is facing a life or death scenario, a rough time frame does little to ease the immense stress and pain they feel.
We know that it will benefit this proportion of the population.
We still want them to have a normal life and do what other children do.
The lack of funding for daratumumab is part of a bigger picture in New Zealand, that we just don't fund modern medicines in New Zealand. It's incredibly frustrating and heartbreaking to be treating myeloma patients in New Zealand in a suboptimal way.
We would like Pharmac to stop procrastinating and actually fund this product. It's actually time because the economics stack up for it.
There's this amazing medication called Kalydeco which will effectively switch it off. It'll switch off the CF is how it was explained to us. The next sentence he explained that it's amazing but it's not available in New Zealand.
There are so many things in health that need to be funded, and what I'd like to have an understanding or better understanding of in the health system is how we invest generally in health and where we get the sense of value. That's my real focus, so that we can make sure that when we are thinking about funding the next dollar into the health system, that we're making the right decision. That's the important thing.
That's all for today. I'm Davina Zimmer, and this episode was engineered by Jeremy Ansell and produced by Alexia Russell. Thank you to Dr. David Hughes. The Detail was funded through RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Ka kite anō.